All right, in this video, we're going to duplicate in a way what we did with our last video, talking about Stephen March's Death of the College essay, where we focused on the topic of AI in higher education and wanted to see what skills, what part of our experience writing the reaction paper might benefit us as we take a look and get familiar with our new project in the discipline paper. So this time, we're going to take a look at another text, another article that you might use to help write your discipline paper. But this time, we're going to be emphasizing and illuminating the ways that what we learned with our problem solution paper might be beneficial to us. And since hopefully we have the last video sort of fresh in our minds, we're not going to spend as much time going through this article, and it's a bit briefer, so um, this video shouldn't take as long. Um, some of you are probably quite relieved at that. But notice here, first of all, this essay or this article is titled "The College Essay is Still Very Much Alive." And if that sounds familiar, it's for a reason. The author here, Christopher Rim, wrote this just 2 days after Stephen March published his article. And in case you were wondering, this is an article written in response to Mr. March and his argument that the college essay is dead. Um, Mr. Rim here begs to differ. So let's have a look at why and how that is. Like I said, we're not going to spend a ton of time going through things here like the introduction, but I just wanted to point out um, this is another way you can compose attention grabbers. Mr. Rim here uses quote as a lead-in to the topic and to the subject matter. Very well done. Um, that's sort of the first part of the introduction. And notice some key differences here. This introduction is being split up over a couple different paragraphs, whereas we've been sort of learning and practicing containing it to simply one paragraph, even if it's a long paragraph. So understand those that there are differences depending on genre, depending on audience, depending on purpose, etc. Um, this second part then of the introduction I thought was interesting because it shows a clear transition from how we have been, again, learning to begin our introductions broadly and transitioning down into something a little bit more focused. In this case, just like Stephen March was talking about, Mr. Rim is also going to be focusing on um, ChatGPT and generative AI in the college classroom. And, I got to keep emphasizing this. This is from 2022. So this was almost a lifetime ago in terms of AI development. So we'll have to keep that in mind. We'll keep that in mind, and we'll also keep in mind that we are looking at this text, at this article, for the purposes of imagining we were going to use it to write our discipline papers. So be um, be considering your disciplinary approach to how you might tackle the topic of AI in higher ed as we move through this text. So with these first couple of paragraphs, we have our sort of broad lead in with our attention grabber. We transition a bit more to a focused um, aspect of that lead in with generative AI. And then here, Mr. Rim is focusing the scope of his discussion even more by now actually sort of calling out Stephen March. Um, and one of the ways, if you look right here, one of the ways Mr. Rim does that is by referencing the article referencing the publication, just like we've been practicing, just like we do with our writing in the introductions, pointing out what Mr. March is arguing, boiling it down here sort of at the end. March reduces students' work to technological output valuable for its product rather than its process. So this is how Mr. Rim is interpreting or is reading Mr. March's article. I mean, went from this very general, broad introduction to now a very specific and very focused manifestation or iteration of that topic. So one of the things you can do is while we're looking at this text for the purposes of thinking of our discipline paper, right, recalling the ways that the problem solution paper might help us, you can also note that this is actually a very useful example or exemplar of how to write an introduction in a lot of ways. And this is for a professional publication at Forbes, Forbes.com. So not for nothing, we can we can sort of see how some of the skills we practice in these classes might actually translate to professional authorship someday. Anyway, that's not the end of the introduction, though. What RIM does here is gets very specific, and this is where I would say if there's going to be something like a thesis statement or a central argument, it would be in this paragraph. Um, the bulk of it here in the top is basically Mr. Rim um, recapping or almost summarizing what March did in his article. And that's a sort of necessary backdrop and contextualization for what Mr. M plans to do in this text and in this article. What I'm doing here, in case you haven't noticed, is by the way, take a look at this picture compared to March's. Even the visual rhetoric is different from article to article. Um, We're not talking so much about the problem solution paper yet because Mr. M hasn't really gotten into it. All Mr. M has been doing though so far is setting the stage for the discussion he's going to have. Then we get down here to this thesis statement, and I'll read it. Couching sweeping statements such as these in a broader argument about the lack of collaboration and mutual understanding between the fields of humanities and technology, March misrepresents the value of the humanities as a discipline and therefore the role that new technologies can and do play in humanities classrooms. So very clearly, Mr. Rim is taking issue with Mr. March, and in this very specific way. As you can imagine, a thesis statement like this, it all but promises that we are going to encounter some things that Mr. Rim believes are problematic, not only with March and March's presentation of AI in higher ed, but maybe the topic AI in higher ed overall or in general. And so let's take a look at some of that. Right away, right immediately subsequent to the thesis statement, um, here's a little bit of what Mr. Rim sees as problematic. Um, so he says to begin this paragraph here that Mr. March focused primarily on a certain thing, but that was sort of misguided. And that's a misreading or a misunderstanding of things. In fact, little attention has been directed to the article's fundamental misunderstanding of the value of the college essay, and the substance of liberal arts education more broadly. In other words, I wanted to show you this move because when you go about, and I'm saying this with our problem solution papers sort of, you know, fresh on our minds. They've been graded. You're hopefully working on revising them if you're interested in that. And one of the things I noticed while I was grading them is the way that you encountered problems, the way that you engaged with them and began to discuss them. oftentimes was very much at a distance and very much generalized or even vague. And I wanted to show you the moves here that Mr. Rim makes because Mr. Rim, it's almost like he's combining the skills that we learned with our reaction papers. In other words, taking on directly an author, taking on directly a text, engaging with it clearly and overtly, and saying, yeah, I understand that it does this thing, but it's misguided and it's a misunderstanding of the situation, and that's a problem. And so that's what Mr. Rim does here. And this is a very, I think, effective way of illuminating what you might find problematic with a text or an author or a topic or all the above. So this is one way of looking at that, and one way of doing that. Um, one one consideration to make after you've identified what the problem is to find a way to say it in other words or to expand on what you see as being problematic. So right here, after Rim said that, what March was saying about the college essay is kind of short-sighted and misunderstanding things. Um, because there is a lot of value in it, and there is a lot of value in the humanities. Um, instead of just leaving it that, instead of just leaving it for the reader to guess or infer what he means, if this sounds familiar, this is something I've told many of you in the comments of your paper so far. Mr. Rim doesn't leave it at that. Mr. Rim goes beyond and actually says what he thinks the problem is. And I'll read it once again. If we cannot articulate the reason that the college essay has been the cornerstone of education in humanities, it is impossible to determine whether it will be helped or hurt as we reach new horizons of technological advancement. That's an important, as concise or brief as it is, it's an important follow-on to identifying the problem. Identifying the problem is one thing. My encouragement, my exhortation to you is to go beyond that and lay it out plainly and clearly for your reader. All right, let's see what else we got here. I thought this moment was awfully interesting. When I was saying a moment ago that um, Mr. Rim combines a little bit of what we did in the reaction paper to what we have done also in the problem solution paper. Here's another example of that. And this paragraph leads off, this is where March's article falls short. That's a direct response, a direct reaction to, again, this text and this author. So if you were wondering how it might look or be or feel in practice to make this kind of move in your writing, here's where it is. This is what it looks like. This is a great example of that. All right, here's another problem. Um, uh, Another problem as identified by Mr. Rim. So some of the ways we can um, identify problems are to take things at their face value on the merits as a result of engaging with the substance of it. Um, what Mr. Rim does partially is illuminate problems as a result of critiquing the text that he's engaging with, in this case, Mr. March. Ultimately, while an essay or dissertation is often the product of learning in the humanities, it is not the core substance. In other words, this first line up here is something that, if you'll recall, March was arguing in his article. Here is Rim illuminating the problem once again by reacting or responding to something that March said. So again, this is a very effective way of not only just in general going about writing about problems and solutions, but making the best use of the skills that we've been practicing with the papers we've been writing. And once again, just like Mr. Rim has done in paragraphs previous to this one, after identifying the problem, after explaining it for a number of sentences, here's one way to sort of finish it up or sum it up or wrap it up. Because of this, the humanities are not simply an education in what to think, but how to think. In other words, Rim is saying here that Mr. March is wrong. It's not just some product-driven thing. The humanities and especially writing college essays are important because it teaches us how to think, not just come up with a thing and evaluate the thing, in this case, an essay. And that becomes emblematic of whatever it is we're supposed to be doing in college. No, it's the process along the way, is what Mr. Rim is arguing. See, here we're almost done. This one, this one's a little bit shorter than our last video. Um, and here's just another example of a problem. In this case, if you'll recall, March leaned on a couple of other authors in order to make some of the points he was trying to make. Um, One of the moments in March's article was when he was talking about um, how some people view generative AI programs like ChatGPT as a tool similar to something like Grammarly or EasyBib. And again, I want to put in parentheses here. This is back in 2022. So just imagine, just behold how much things have changed since then. Um, it's really an interesting perspective. Regardless, these highlighted areas here are just some of the ways that I saw Mr. Rim engaging with March's treatment of the generative AI here. Um, Really, as March was diminishing the humanities, Rim was trying to caution and in other words, finding problems with the way that March was going about and conceptualizing and explaining how he sees generative AI in higher ed. Um, Mr. Rim was saying that all of these automated tools are only as good as their inputs. Another way of looking at that same problem is if students trust the software without even bothering to learn the intricacies of different formatting styles, they could produce citations that are woefully incorrect without the ability to identify the errors. I got to emphasize again, we're taking a look at this article and this text by Rim and the other one by March because our topic for our discipline paper is AI in higher ed. Our task within that topic is what does our discipline, what we're studying, our field, the career we hope to go into one day, what does our discipline have to say about AI in higher ed? In other words, what are the problems that your discipline sees? What does your discipline propose as solutions? Um, when you come across articles like this, with whatever your discipline is, and we're considering whether or not generative AI is merely some simple tool to use, or is it something more than that? Is it something more consequential than that? Is it something more impactful than that? What does your discipline have to say about it? How would your discipline go about solving it? Whatever problems or would stem from that. Rim finishes out this part of uh, discussing this problematic aspect by saying if students don't understand what makes good prose or stylistic academic writing, and this is one of the moments when Rim is really trying to defend his point of view that the college essay, in fact, is not dead, but very much alive. Or if they cannot formulate a nuanced and original argument based on primary source material, how are they to judge whether the output of ChatGPT offers them a more compelling paper than what they have or could have written themselves? And that's a very keen observation. I have to say though, here at the end, I don't know. Maybe I'm misunderstanding March, but I think one of my last comments here was I feel like I feel like I want to defend March a little bit. That I'm not so sure March was saying that the humanities don't matter or that they're that he's just totally down on the humanities or the people who work in the humanities or teach in the humanities. I think March was casting a lot of blame, a lot of blame on the tech people, a lot of blame on the humanities people. And he was basically encouraging them, to put it very diplomatically, to step their game up. And when Rim goes after March like he does, it's almost as if he's going after March. Um, I don't know, in a way that I'm not sure March deserves. Nevertheless, I highlight those moments here in this last little paragraph because I want you to see what that could look like when you're taking on a text, when you're taking on an author, and March admittedly was pretty pretty nasty in a few places in his articles or in his article, coming down on whether the tech folks or the humanities folks. And if you'll recall from that video, I brought into focus the ethos that you construct, the ethos that you constitute with the choices you make in your writing. Rim here, I thought was very stern, very measured, but fair. Even if these last few parts here, I think maybe a little bit inaccurate. Even still, I don't think Rim was trying to be um, mean and nasty about things. So just note the difference, is what I'm saying here in the ethos of each of these authors and how they go about getting their points across. It matters. It matters to the audience. It matters how you're perceived. It matters to the efficacy of the message that you try to convey or the argument that you try to make. So these were just some of the ways that you could look at and see and potentially do something with the problems. Mr. Rim didn't have much in the way of solutions. It was mostly a defense um, of a thing, in this case, the college essay, by finding and identifying, illuminating problems as presented by another author, which is one of the many very viable ways that you might consider going about um, leveraging and harnessing the skills from our problem solution paper to bring to bear on now our discipline paper. So, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you in class.